So let's talk about Dune Awakening, or rather the current state of Dune Awakening as it stands right now. Dune Awakening is a fairly new game. It is a survival crafting game, which is similar to the games like Valheim, things like Ark Survival and whatnot. This one does have a very unique twist in that it is both PvP and PvE, which is an interesting take on things, but it does lead to some frustrations, which is going to be one of the major talking points in today's video. There's also the other issue when it comes to cheating and exploits, which is making life quite miserable for players that are playing by the rules, since there are a group of people that are going out of their way and actually ruining the experience for others, and it doesn't seem like much has been done to take care of it. So let's first start off and talk more about Dune Awakening and how we got here. So Dune Awakening, it is a very interesting game in the fact that it is a game based on the movie/books of Dune universe, and it is going to be taking place on this mostly desert planet, which is Arrakis, with a very harsh survival aspect where water is very scarce, at least in the early game or how it's initially presented to you. And there's also going to be this ever-looming threat of sandworms, which are going to be kind of patrolling the open sands of the map, and does offer a kind of unique dynamic in the fact that they are going to give a permadeath mechanic, so to speak. I mean, not really permadeath, but if you do die, you lose everything on your inventory and it gets completely deleted and erased. So if you do end up dying to a worm, you kind of lose everything that you have. Obviously, you have to keep your base and everything that you don't have on you, but it can be quite a interesting experience, so to speak, when it comes to the worms, since they do offer a very harsh penalty if you do end up getting caught out by one. Let's start off and talk a bit more about the worm, because that is one of the aspects that is a little bit frustrating. The first issue, I think it's more of a minor one, but when it comes to the worms themselves, they are still very buggy. I've seen a lot of reports on Reddit, and I've also had experiences myself where worms do bizarre things, where you'll see a worm suddenly going through the sand, then it'll just like launch itself up in the air, start flying across, potentially kills you, does some weird stuff. Sometimes the worm will end up aggroing on someone else and it will erupt out of the sand, but ends up killing you immediately without a warning. It does some weird stuff, and I think if you're going to have a mechanic like the sandworm that is going to offer such a harsh penalty when you do end up dying to it, you need to be careful it doesn't end up bugging out. When you have worms that are flying across the screen in the air, that is a big problem, and that really needs to be addressed, because I've seen a lot of people, I've physically seen other players in front of me die to buggy worm mechanics. I've seen lots of clips on Reddit, on YouTube, of people dying to flying worms and other kind of nonsense. And I myself have ended up dying to a couple of bugged out scenarios against the sand, which can be quite frustrating. That is one of the bugs. There are quite a few bugs in the game which haven't really been sorted out. And I don't know, the developers have been very slow when it comes to bug fixing. They have sorted out some of them, but there are a lot that still remains to be worked on, which is something that I do wish was dealt with a higher priority. Speaking of bugs and other exploits, there is obviously the big problem when it comes to cheaters. There have been many cases of players that have used duplication, where they are able to dupe resources and then get a massive advantage, because obviously if you can duplicate resources, you can kind of just build whatever weaponry you want. And considering the game has a PvP mechanic to it, that is even bigger problem, because if players are cheating, they are therefore gaining a big advantage when it comes to the PvP side. Now, they have fixed some of these duplication exploits, but there are some that are still going unchecked. Again, I myself have experienced one of these, where there is apparently a new exploit where players can actually steal stuff right out of your base, even if your base is in a PvE zone, even if your base is sometimes in a Hagar Basin. I remember I logged on one morning and I noticed 300 of my spice melange was just disappeared, and it can't be someone in my alliance that have taken it, because my alliance pretty much consists mostly of my girlfriend and I, and there's pretty much no one else has access to our base, and she didn't take it. I know I didn't take it, so it just vanished one day. And I noticed a lot of people on Reddit, a lot of people on even the game servers have reported a lot of their items are just vanishing mysteriously. And apparently there's an exploit where players can just enter your base, they can have x-ray vision, even see where all your, if you try to hide it with like hidden chests, players can just take what they want. And that is a very big problem. I mean, if you log on one morning and all your valuable stuff is gone, that's a lot of work that players have to get some of these resources. I mean, Spice Melange, for example, can take quite a while, especially if you are playing solo or you don't have a whole lot of time. Getting a couple of hundred Spice Melange can take a lot of people many hours to achieve, let alone if you have thousands of Melange, which could also get stolen. And that is a very big problem, because as far as I'm aware, funcom have a pretty much zero refund policy. In other words, if you have something that bugged out, if you lost a vehicle, or something got destroyed, or something got stolen, they're not going to refund you. They're not going to provide you with any backups. So that means that you as a player, if someone cheats and exploits and gets into your base, takes things that don't belong to them, you can't do anything about that. That's nothing that you can do about it. You can't get a refund. And that is a very big problem. That can lead to a lot of players quitting, because if you're someone that has experienced these things and you continuously experience these things, those players are going to quit. When players end up dying to bugged out sandworms and they lose a lot of progress and they end up having hundreds of hours of this destroyed potentially, there's a good chance they're going to quit. And over time, more and more players are going to end up leaving the game because of these issues. And unless more emphasis is done to fix the anti-cheat system of the game to make it harder for players to, break the system and steal resources, if you do end up allowing your players to run rampant and end up cheating, especially in a game with a PvP aspect to it, that is a major problem. And picture a squad of people that is cheating. They can just go around the world taking whatever they want from other players. They use those resources they've stolen to build an army of high-tier assault ornithopters or scout ornithopters with rockets. They have a pretty much infinite pool of resources they can acquire from other players, and they use these resources to build their own, tools of destruction, so to speak, and they can just go around in the PvP section of the deep desert and just attack anyone on site because, hey, if they die, it doesn't matter. They can just steal more resources overnight when everyone's asleep. And it doesn't really bother them because it's not even their own resources they're using to make these, vehicles or weaponry. And they're just going to use it against other players to grief other players, to troll other players, and just be a nuisance on the server. I think this is a major issue that needs to be addressed ASAP. And the fact that it hasn't been addressed so far is a big concern to me because it is something that is going to make a lot of players quit the game potentially. Another very big issue of the game is regarding the whole way that PvP and PvE is handled in the game. Now, the game is a very interesting system where the majority of Haga Basin, maybe excluding maybe a few crash sites of some starships, but otherwise like 99% of Haga Basin is pretty much PvE. So for the most part, this game is, at least if you're a new player, if you're just getting into the game, it is presented to you as a PvE experience, which is great. I mean, PvE, there's nothing wrong with that. PvP, there's nothing wrong with that either. But then when you want to transition to the endgame content or the tier 6 resource when it comes to the advanced ornithopters, the advanced weaponry, there is a kind of final tier of weaponry and vehicles, and that is going to be the Plastanium tier or the tier 6 resources. Now, these resources are going to be, a lot of them exclusively found only in the deep desert, and the deep desert is half of it is PvP and the other half is PvE. Now, initially it was full PvP where the whole deep desert pretty much, except for like the spawn area, was pretty much PvP. And that led to a lot of frustration because a lot of players, they don't want to engage in PvP. They just want to keep playing the game as a PvE experience. Now, I've seen a lot of arguments on both sides of this coin where a lot of players say, well, if you don't like the PvP aspect, then stay out of the deep desert. But a lot of those players, they still want to enjoy the endgame content, but they don't want to engage in PvP. So what do they end up doing? So the developers have made a change where they did end up making half of the deep desert PvE and the other half PvP to try strike a balance. However, they did end up limiting it so that there is going to be a scarcer amount of the tier 6 resources in the PvE section. You can find these resources, they are there, but it is going to be a lot rarer. However, there is now another problem with regards to this. A lot of players in the PvE section are building their structures over the very limited resources. So if there's nodes like titanium nodes or stavridium nodes, which are going to be a resource which you need to create plastanium, a lot of players are building their bases over these nodes to kind of gatekeep other players from getting them. And that is also another form of griefing, which is a big problem. Now, if this happens in the PvP section, it's not a big problem because if someone's building their base in an obnoxious position, you can just destroy it. But in the PvE side of things, players building their bases over important resources cannot be destroyed, which is now forming a new way of griefing towards PvE players. Now, another issue is if you are a PvE player or a solo player, or you're someone that doesn't want to engage in combat, if you go into the deep desert in the PvP section and you want to farm these resources, whether it be spice, whether it be titanium, you are going to get other players which are going to potentially attack you. And if you go in with a storage ornithopter and you don't have weaponry, you're going to be a term known as ganked, where players just kind of come out of nowhere, attack you, and you don't have any time to react. If you're on foot, 1 or 2 rockets is pretty much going to down you, and you're not going to have even time to know what hit you before they end up killing you, and then they're going to destroy your ornithopter, and you're going to have a bunch of your progress reset. Now, that is a little bit of an annoyance. However, it is a PvP game. A lot of players will argue and say, well, that's PvP for you. If you don't want to engage with that, then stay in the PvE zone. However, there is another issue with regards to this, is that there's pretty much no rewards for attacking someone and destroying their ornithopter or destroying them on the ground like this, because you can't take everyone's loot. You can take some loot, resources they've gathered, you can potentially steal, but their weapons, their armor, their vehicle itself, you can't steal for yourself. If a player hasn't really gathered any resources, killing them like this is going to achieve pretty much nothing. And there isn't really any defense if you are playing solo against this. You can pretty much choose if you want to play storage or rocket. So when you have an ornithopter, you cannot put storage on and weaponry at the same time. So you have to pretty much decide, do you want to gather resources or do you want to attack other players? And if you do end up putting on rockets, you do have a little bit of a movement penalty, so it makes it a little bit easier for people to fly away. However, the problem with that is it doesn't really matter. If the player's on the ground, they're not even going to get a chance to get to the ornithopter. When they do end up getting ganked, so to speak, where they do end up getting kind of taken out of nowhere from players that are going to just kind of dive bomb them and kill them before they even have a chance to react. Now, I think this is a fault of the game, the way the game is designed. It hasn't given any real reason to engage in PvP, and therefore the only real PvP there is right now is most of the time it's kind of griefers versus people that are just trying to mind their own business and enjoy the game. Now, ideally what is supposed to happen, or the way that I think that they envision this scenario to happen, is there are supposed to be these high concentration of spice fields or resources, and you're going to have big teams that are going to fight each other over these important nodes. However, here is why this doesn't really work. The first thing is there are a lot of players that are going to play the game solo. The people that don't really have maybe friends in this game, people that don't really, they don't really want to socialize with everyone. They just want to play the game and as a PvE experience and kind of just, log on. They don't want to have all the, stresses of having to deal with other people because, obviously when you're playing an alliance, it's not going to be as peaceful. You're going to have a leader who's going to say, okay, guys, you need to gather more resource. We need to do this. And maybe some people don't want to have to deal with other people telling them what to do. They don't want to have to deal with other people kind of barking orders at them. They just want to play the game in their own pace at their own time, and they don't really want to play with other alliances. And that's perfectly fine. They should be allowed to exist, and they should have that as an option to them. However, when you do end up gatekeeping all the endgame content from these players, when they end up reaching the endgame, they are presented with a choice. They either have to, change the way they play, or they have to either stop playing the game because there's not really many other options for them. If they try to maintain their same play style and they just want to kind of mind their business going to the deep desert, you're pretty much rolling a dice every time you go out whether or not you're going to get attacked by players while you are either gathering resources, and there's not much you can do about it. And I think that is a bit of a problem with the game because, again, there isn't really any real incentive to engage in PvP. Even when it comes to the big spice fields where that's supposed to be where the big alliances fight for control over these spice fields and have these big epic showdowns. And that does sometimes happen. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. It does sometimes happen, but for the most part, these big spice fields have so much spice that you literally cannot harvest it all. Even if you have a big team of players, you don't have enough time to harvest it all before it ends up disappearing to the giant ringworm. Because if you guys don't know, after a certain amount of time has passed, you will see a giant ringworm will spawn and kind of like eat the spice field. And quite often when I've experienced this, there is still about half the spice at least left in the big spice fields, which all goes to waste. So there really isn't much point in PvP. You can all share the resources. And for the most part, if everyone on the server plays peacefully and no one fights each other, there's enough resources to go around for everyone. There is pretty much no logical reason to PvP unless you just want to blow everyone up because you want to be an anarchist and you want to fight everyone because you just enjoy fighting everyone, which some people do enjoy, some people don't. But the problem is when you're kind of putting those two very conflicting groups of people together, it leads to a lot of friction and a lot of frustration because when you look at the global chat, a lot of people complain because they're like, why'd you kill me? There was no reason to do that. Whereas other players go, if you don't like it, then stop playing PvP games or get good, or, there's very much like peaceful players who just want to mind their business and aggressive players who attack them for seemingly no reason. And I think that's a flaw of the game itself. I think if the developers gave like actual reasons to use PvP, maybe make the Lance Rod more PvP focused, make the control, put higher emphasis on the control points to actually make people engage in real PvP, where two parties are actually choosing to engage in each other, that will be a lot more fun. Me personally, I find PvP a lot more fun when it's with someone that can defend themselves and I can defend myself and we actually engage in a dogfight and we actually have fun attacking each other. That to me is real PvP. However, this game doesn't really support that ideology as well as it should. The potential is there, but for the most part, PvP is handled very weirdly in this game where, it's mostly just PvE players versus PvP players. It's like a game of cat and mouse or however you want to put it. And for the most part, it feels like people are getting bullied by other people who just want to kind of go around and troll people or grief people. Now, I'm not saying PvP shouldn't exist. I do actually like the fact the game has PvP in it, but I wish it was handled a little bit better. I wish there was a type of system where there was like a big reward and a reason to actually go up against other players who also want to go up and compete for various resources, and where you both compete directly against each other in an open confrontation, rather than this weird kind of choose, do you want to be the aggressor or do you want to be the farmer, and do you want to try go out and gather resources, or do you want to be the kind of person that goes and blows everyone up and just trolls people? So I don't know. I think that PvP in this game definitely could be handled a lot better. And I think that's another very big contention point in the game, which might end up making a lot of players quit the game. I think a lot of people that play solo or kind of want to just enjoy a PvE experience, they get kind of gatekept by that when it comes to the end game. And I think a lot of other players are potentially going to drop the game when it comes to all the issues regarding bugs and when it comes to issues regarding cheaters, which can end up making them lose lots and lots of progress. I think a game like this that does demand a lot of time, when players do end up feeling like they are robbed of progress, whether it be from PvP mechanics that don't really seem very fair, or whether it be from bugs or cheater exploits, which also are obviously not very fair. When players do feel like their time is being wasted for no fault of their own, potentially, you're probably going to see a lot of them quit, and that could end up hurting the game long term before it actually ends up getting a good enough start. I think another big issue with the game is the lack of endgame content. I mean, obviously it's a new game, so I don't mind it that much yet, but after time, this could become more and more of an issue if the developers aren't actively putting more endgame content. A good example of a game that had very, very good endgame content, which was somewhat similar to this game, is Ark Survival. If you don't know Ark Survival, it's a game with dinosaurs, and you can kind of tame and capture your own dinosaurs and breed them and make armies of your own very strong dinosaurs. And then you can use these armies of dinosaurs. They're kind of like vehicles in Ark Survival. You can breed these dinosaurs, make epic, strong, mega tier dinosaurs, and you can use them to attack big bosses and major endgame content where it will actually keep you busy potentially. You want to do all of it for months, if not even years. It has a lot of endgame content. I think that was very, very exciting. They also added new maps periodically where there were like DLCs where you could download and buy a new map, where there was new content, new dinosaurs, new regions to explore, new biomes, all kinds of new stuff to explore. And I think that could be used very nicely in Dune Awakening, something like that as well. There's currently no real major boss fights. There's currently only one map, which again, it's a new game, I understand, so this might take time to come out, but it would be very cool if we got new factions periodically, if we got new maps other than just Hager Base, and maybe new types of maps, maybe a polar map. Obviously, there is like a polar ice cap on Arrakis, so you could maybe make some snow biome maps potentially. You could do like a new deep desert type of biome, maybe like where you get tier 7 resources at certain stages and have maybe boss fights where you can take on maybe some giant sandworm or some kind of major boss as a big PvE experience where you get very rare in-game resources if you do end up defeating it, some unique weapons and blueprints for vehicles potentially. Something like that would be very, very fun, I think, in this game and help improve its longevity, because as it stands right now, it's kind of do all the single player PvE stuff in Hager Basin, then get to the more PvP centric side of Deep Desert. After you build yourself a couple of tier 6 vehicles and you build yourself a couple of tier 6 armor pieces and weaponry, there really isn't much more to do beyond that. You know, you build yourself a nice base, and the base building of the game is quite nice and very satisfying. But after you build yourself maybe a nice base, you've got a few of the tier 6 vehicles and weaponry, there really isn't much to do beyond that point. And I think it would be very nice that the developers actively work towards giving players more incentive to push, to keep going, and to do more exciting stuff with maybe teams or even by themselves if they so choose. Anyway, I'm kind of getting a bit sidetracked here. I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but enough of me yapping. That's just how I feel about the game currently. I do think it's a very unique game, and I do very much like what Funcom have designed here. I think the Dune Awakening experience has a lot of potential. Even its starting point is actually quite satisfying, but there are certain issues that need to be ironed out, and there's also a lack of endgame content, which I think needs to be addressed in order for this game to truly shine long term and end up being something that people play for years to come. Hopefully they figure it out. Hopefully they do end up coming to a good conclusion of what we can hope to expect from this game in the long term. As it is right now, like I said, it is a fun game. It is definitely something that can keep you busy for a while, but there does end up reaching a point where things can end up kind of leaving a sour taste in your mouth. And I'm hoping that Funcom do end up addressing this in the near future. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments section below. What are your current thoughts of Dune Awakening? Are you liking the game? What are you liking about it? What are you disliking about it? And what would you do if you could improve the game? What would be your ideas? I'd love to find out. And I'll see you guys again next time. Take care, everyone, and bye-bye.